The desert was quiet except for the cry of a child. It came from a circle of tents set against the red cliffs, where smoke from dying campfires curled into the dawn. The Apache camp had survived another night of wind and hunger. But no one could rest now, not with the chieftain's son wailing without pause. His small fists trembled in the chill, his face red from crying, his breath shallow like a flame about to go out. Warriors stood outside, their shadows tall and silent, uneasy at the sound. In a tribe hardened by war and loss, even the cry of an infant could pierce the heart. The child's mother had died 2 nights earlier during childbirth. The healers had done what they could, but the fever took her before the stars dimmed. Now the baby refused to eat. He rejected goat's milk and water, and the camp had run out of hope. The old women said the spirit of his mother still called to him from beyond the ridge, and if no one answered, he would follow her before sunrise. The chief, a man of few words and many scars, held his son in his arms. His jaw set like stone, but his eyes red from sleepless nights. His warriors could fight soldiers. They could ride through fire and thunder. But none knew how to quiet the cry of a motherless child. Across the camp, a young white woman sat bound inside a tent. She had been captured weeks ago during a raid near the trading post by the river. Her dress was torn, her wrists rubbed raw from the ropes, and her face carried the marks of fear and dust. She had watched everything, the birth, the death, the mourning, and now the endless crying. The sound cut through her as deeply as it did the others. She had once been a mother to, though she had not spoken of it. The memory of her own child, buried back east, under a cold winter sky, lived in her heart like a ghost. Outside, the chief's patience broke. He shouted for the medicine woman. "Do something." "He will not stop." The healer came, shaking herbs in her hands, muttering to the spirits, but nothing changed. The boy's tiny cries grew weaker, his lips pale. The camp fell into a heavy silence. The white prisoner listened, trembling. She could not bear it any longer. With her voice hoarse from days of silence, she called through the tent flap, her words barely above a whisper. "Let me hold him," she said. No one answered. "Please," she tried again. "I can help him." A guard turned toward her with a frown. He barked something in Apache she could not understand. The woman lowered her gaze, clutching her knees, then said softly, "I can nurse him." The words hung in the air like smoke. The guard froze. Another warrior stepped closer, his brow furrowing in disbelief. He left to fetch the chief. Moments later, the tent flap opened, and the tall warrior entered with his child still in his arms. His presence filled the space like thunder. The white woman's breath caught. She saw his face streaked with pain and grief, his long braids hanging over his chest, his muscles tense as if ready to strike. His dark eyes met hers full of mistrust and sorrow. "You speak our tongue?" he asked slowly, his accent heavy. She shook her head. "Only a few words," she said. "But I know a hungry child when I hear one." The chief stared at her for a long moment, then down at the infant who whimpered weakly against his shoulder. He wanted to refuse her to protect the pride of his people, but something in her tone disarmed him. Desperation had no color in the eyes of a father. Without a word, he placed the baby in her arms. The woman's heart pounded as she held the small, warm body against her chest. The boy quieted, his tiny hand curling around her finger as if recognizing something familiar. Then, for the first time in days, silence filled the tent. Outside, the warriors gathered in disbelief. They watched through the gaps in the hides as the white prisoner cradled their chief's son, whispering softly to him. The wind carried her words, a gentle rhythm unlike anything they'd heard before. Some called it witchcraft. Others said it was mercy. The old medicine woman watched too, her wrinkled face unreadable. She finally muttered, "Maybe the spirits chose her." When the child finally slept, the chief took him back carefully, his expression caught between gratitude and confusion. "Why would you help us?" he asked. She hesitated, her eyes glistening in the dim firelight. "Because he's just a child," she said. "And no child should die, because men hate each other." He studied her closely, as if searching for hidden deceit, then nodded once and left. The woman exhaled shakily. For the first time since her capture, no one came to tie her wrists again. That night, the camp changed. The warriors who had once looked at her with scorn now watched with wary curiosity. Children peeked at her from behind tents. The old women brought her food. The healer said nothing but laid a small charm beside her sleeping mat, a sign of respect. Yet, though the air had softened, danger still lingered. The chief's trust was fragile, and the tribe's hatred for white settlers ran deep. One wrong move could turn mercy into death. As the days passed, the woman continued to care for the infant. Each time he cried, she whispered gently, her voice like a lullaby that carried across the camp. The chief often stood outside, listening unseen, torn between duty and something he could not name. The boy began to grow stronger, his cries turning to coos, his eyes following the woman wherever she went. Slowly, a fragile peace formed between her and the tribe. But whispers began to voice his questioning what it meant when an Apache child found comfort in the arms of a white woman. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, a group of young warriors returned from scouting. They brought grim news. Soldiers were moving toward their valley. The tribe would have to decide whether to fight or flee. The chief called a council. Fires burned late into the night as men argued over strategy. Some demanded that the woman be killed before the soldiers arrived, fearing she might betray them. Others, remembering the way she had saved the child, urged the chief to protect her. Torn between his people and his gratitude, the chief sat in silence. When dawn came, he walked to her tent. She was sitting beside the baby, feeding him, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "They don't trust me," she said softly. "Do you?" He didn't answer right away. "If you wished to betray us," he said finally, "you could have done it already." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But understand this, if harm comes to my people because of you, I will be the one to end it." She met his gaze steadily. "I understand," she said. "But if harm comes to your son, you will call for me again." Their eyes held in the golden light of morning. For a moment, the line between captive and captor blurred. Then, the baby stirred in her arms, cooing softly, and the chief looked away. He turned to leave, but paused at the entrance. "If the soldiers come," he said, "you will stay hidden. No one must know you are here." She nodded, though her heart trembled. She knew too well what soldiers did when they found a white woman among natives. That night, as the wind howled through the canyons, the camp prepared for battle. Horses were saddled, arrows sharpened, drums silenced. The woman sat alone with the sleeping child, listening to the sounds of men readying themselves for war. She felt torn between two worlds, one that had taken her captive and one that had already forgotten her. Yet in her arms lay the only thing that still felt human. She pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, whispering, "I'll keep you safe." Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, not from the sky, but from the distant march of soldiers drawing closer. The child stirred and began to cry again, louder this time. The woman's heart pounded. She rocked him, whispering to calm him, but his cries grew sharp. Footsteps approached. The chief burst through the flap, his face pale in the torchlight. "They're here," he said. The cries echoed into the night like a warning bell, and every warrior in the camp froze. In that moment, both woman and warrior understood the fate of the tribe might rest in the arms of the white prisoner and the child who would not stop crying. The desert wind carried the scent of smoke and gunpowder long before the soldiers appeared. By the time the first faint lights flickered across the horizon, the Apache camp was already stirring like a hive disturbed. Warriors moved swiftly and silently, their faces painted, their eyes sharp with determination. Mothers gathered children into the shadows, and horses snorted in the dark, sensing what was coming. Inside the tent, the white woman held the baby close to her chest, her heartbeat matching his cries. Every sound outside made her flinch. She knew what war meant. She had seen soldiers burn cabins and drag men from their homes. She had watched her own husband die that way before she was taken. The memory still burned behind her eyes, sharper than the flames that once devoured her world. The chief stepped into the tent again, carrying his bow. His face was streaked with ash, the color of mourning and war. He looked down at the woman and the child, his expression torn between duty and fear. "You stay here," he ordered. "If I don't return before sunrise, take the child and go east, toward the mountains. There is water there." His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. She looked at him, clutching the baby tighter. "What if they find us?" she asked. His eyes hardened. "Then you do what you must to keep him alive." With that, he turned and left, his shadow swallowed by the firelight outside. The night erupted in chaos soon after. Gunfire cracked through the silence, echoing across the canyon walls. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the dry wind carried the sounds of death. The woman crouched low, holding the child close, whispering to him in a trembling voice to stay quiet. But the baby, frightened by the noise, began to wail again. Panic surged in her chest. She pressed him against her shoulder, rocking gently, praying he wouldn't give them away. The tent's flap fluttered as a figure stumbled inside. She froze, but it was not a soldier. It was a young Apache boy, barely older than 12, his arm bleeding, eyes wide with fear. He fell to his knees beside her. "They came from both sides," he gasped. "The soldiers knew we were here." She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped his arm, her hand shaking. "Where's your family?" she asked, but the boy only shook his head. Outside, the war drums had turned to screams. The chief's voice could be heard shouting orders, his words fierce and desperate. The woman wanted to run, to take the child and flee into the darkness, but something held her back. It wasn't just fear, it was the strange unspoken bond she had formed with the people who had once been her captors. Somewhere out there, men were dying to protect this camp. This child, and somehow, she was part of that fight now. Minutes or hours passed like smoke. The gunfire began to fade. The boy at her side had fallen asleep, his wound bandaged. The baby's cries had softened into small, tired breaths. Then came footsteps, slow, deliberate. She looked toward the tent's opening, expecting the chief, but when the flap lifted, a man in a blue uniform appeared. His hat was gone, his face smeared with dirt, his rifle glinting faintly in the dim firelight. He froze when he saw her. "Dear God," he whispered, "a white woman." He stepped closer, lowering his weapon slightly. "Ma'am, you're safe now." She didn't answer. Her mind raced. Behind her, the baby stirred and let out a small cry. The soldier's gaze snapped toward the sound. "Whose child is that?" he asked. She hesitated, her heart pounding. "Mine," she said finally, her voice firm. The lie slipped out before she could stop it. The soldier frowned, his expression turning suspicious. "You've been living with them?" he asked quietly. "How long?" She didn't respond. He studied her, then the markings on the tent, the feathers tied outside. "We'll take you back," he said, though his tone was uneasy. "You can tell the captain what happened here." But before he could reach for her, an arrow struck him through the shoulder. He staggered back, dropping his rifle. Another figure stepped into view. It was the chief, blood running down his arm, his bow still drawn. The two men locked eyes. The woman stood frozen, clutching the baby as the soldier groaned and fell. The chief stepped inside, pulling the arrow free from his bowstring. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head, unable to speak. He glanced at the fallen soldier, then back at her. "You lied to him," he said. She looked away. "I had to," she murmured. "If they knew he was yours, they'd kill him." The chief said nothing for a long moment. Then he bent down and took the soldier's rifle, checking the ammunition before tossing it aside. "They will return when the sun rises," he said quietly. "We have to move." He reached for the baby, and for a second their hands brushed his rough, hers trembling. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded. "Then come." They slipped into the night together, leaving the burning camp behind. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the sky pale with dawn. Smoke rose in the distance, where the battle had been. The woman stumbled over stones, her bare feet bleeding, but she kept walking. The child slept in her arms now, his small body warm against her chest. The chief walked ahead, silent, every step measured. Finally, When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, he stopped. Below them, the world looked both beautiful and broken, the remains of tents, the glint of weapons, the distant bodies of those who would never return. The chief knelt and touched the ground. "Many of my people are gone," he said softly, "but my son lives." He looked up at her. "Because of you," she swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "I didn't do it for thanks," she whispered. He nodded. "No, you did it because you still have a heart." The wind brushed against them, carrying the faint smell of rain. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "We'll go north. The soldiers won't follow into the high country." He pointed toward the distant mountains, their peaks still dusted with snow. "There's a canyon where my mother once lived. It's hidden. We can rest there." They walked for hours under the blazing sun. The woman's strength began to fade, her throat dry, her legs weak. The chief noticed and slowed his pace. He offered her water from a small leather pouch, and though she hesitated, she took it. When she looked at him, she saw not just a warrior but a father, a man burdened by loss yet still standing. It stirred something in hers, something that frightened her more than the soldiers ever could, as night fell. They reached the edge of the canyon. A small stream glimmered under the moonlight. The chief gathered branches and built a fire while she sat nearby, rocking the child. The flames flickered over their faces, painting them in gold and shadow. "You were taken from your people too," she said quietly. He nodded. "When I was 10. Soldiers came to our village. My father was killed. They took me to a mission school. I forgot my tongue, my name, everything. I ran away when I was old enough to fight." His voice hardened. "Since then, I've been fighting." He looked at her. "And you? Who were you before they brought you here?" She stared into the fire. "A wife," she said. "A mother." Her voice broke. "The soldiers came to our homestead after a raid. They said Apaches had killed settlers nearby. They wanted revenge. They burned everything. My husband tried to stop them." She closed her eyes. "I buried him under an oak tree before they took me." The chief's gaze softened. "And your child?" She shook her head, tears glinting in the firelight. "Gone before winter ended." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not cruel. The fire cracked softly. The baby sighed in his sleep, and the desert night wrapped around them like a secret. The chief finally said, "You have lost much, yet you still gave life to my son. The spirits will remember that." She looked at him, her lips trembling. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she whispered, "but I want to believe there's still something good left in this world." He stirred the fire with a stick. "Maybe that's why the spirits brought you here," he said. "To remind us both." His voice was low, almost gentle now. "Tomorrow we'll find shelter before the rain. The mountains will protect us, but only for a while. The soldiers will not forget what happened." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around the child. The flames flickered lower, their faces fading into shadow. In the distance, lightning flashed across the desert sky, silent but fierce. The woman shivered, sensing that this fragile peace would not last. Somewhere behind them, smoke still rose from the burned camp. The soldiers would come again, searching for what they lost. And when they did, neither mercy nor love would be enough to keep them safe. As the fire died, the baby stirred and whimpered softly, his small cry echoing through the canyon, a reminder that innocence, once caught between two worlds, can never truly belong to either. The morning after the firestorm came quiet but heavy. The desert air carried a strange stillness that made every sound sharper, every breath feel too loud. The woman awoke to the faint cry of the baby and the rhythmic scrape of the chief sharpening his knife near the fire. The night's battle had left him bruised and bloodied, but he did not seem to notice. He worked in silence, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the steel's edge. The woman rose slowly, cradling the child as he fussed. The fire had burned low, leaving only red embers. "Did any of them survive?" she asked softly. The chief didn't look up. "A few," he said. "The rest were taken or killed." His words hung in the air like dust. She wanted to ask more, but his tone warned her not to. He was a man balancing between grief and duty, and neither left room for comfort. When the baby began to cry again, the chief finally glanced up. His expression softened slightly. "He cries for his mother," he said. "He doesn't understand that she's gone." The woman nodded, gently rocking the child. "He cries for life," she murmured. "He's stronger than you think." The chief studied her for a long moment before standing. "We move at dusk," he said. "Soldiers will search the valley by morning. We have to be far before they come." By the time the sun began to set, they had gathered what little they could carry. The chief's wound had reopened, staining his shirt, but he refused her help. She followed him through narrow canyons and over dry riverbeds, the baby strapped to her chest with a woven cloth. The sky burned crimson, and shadows stretched long over the sand. Every distant noise made her heart race. The memory of the soldier's face haunted her the moment she'd lied, the way his eyes widened before the arrow struck. She told herself she had no choice, but part of her still saw his hand reaching out for her, human and afraid. The chief noticed her silence. "You've seen death before," he said quietly, "but this one troubles you." She hesitated. "He didn't deserve to die." His jaw tightened. "None of us do," he said, "but death does not ask who deserves it." They camped that night in a small hollow beneath the cliffs. The firelight flickered across their faces as the wind howled through the stones. The baby slept between them, his tiny breaths barely audible. The woman stared into the flames. "The soldiers won't stop," she said. "They'll keep coming. They think you killed settlers." The chief's eyes flashed. "Some of us did," he said. "After they burned our villages, after they took our women and sent our children to schools where their tongues were punished." His voice hardened. "When you have nothing left, even revenge feels like mercy." She listened, the crackling fire filling the silence that followed. "Not all of them are cruel," she said quietly. "Some don't understand what their orders mean." He looked at her sharply. "And yet they follow them." His words struck her like stones. She turned away, staring into the desert night where the stars shimmered cold and distant. By morning, the world had changed again. The chief's scouts found signs of soldiers' tracks, broken branches, remnants of a campfire not far behind. The woman saw the worry in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. "They're moving fast," he said. "We must reach the mountain pass before they do." The journey grew harder. The terrain steepened, and the woman stumbled often, her feet bleeding. The baby grew restless, crying more each day, and every sound risked drawing attention. The chief carried both his bow and his gilt-like armor, walking ahead in silence. At times, she saw the weariness in his shoulders, the way his steps slowed when he thought she wasn't watching. He was strong, but even strength has limits. When they reached the edge of the mountain trail, they found smoke rising in the distance, a signal fire. The chief cursed under his breath. "They're closer than I thought." He turned to her. "You'll have to hide with the child while I draw them away." Her heart seized. "No," she said. "You'll be killed." His expression was calm, almost resigned. "If they catch us together, none of us live." He pressed a hand against her arm. "There's a cave beyond the ridge. Stay there until the sun is high. If I'm not back by then, go north." She wanted to argue, but his eyes left no room for debate. Before leaving, he looked down at the baby who had begun to fuss again. For the first time, she saw the chief's face softened, not as a warrior, but as a father. "He carries both our worlds," he said quietly, "and both will try to destroy him." Then he turned and disappeared into the brush, his figure fading with the dawn. The woman climbed to the cave as instructed. It was small and dark, filled with the faint scent of old fire. She laid the baby down and tried to still her trembling hands. Time moved like slow water. She strained her ears for sounds of fighting, but all she heard was the wind. As the sun rose higher, she thought she saw movement below the glint of metal, the flash of uniforms. Her breath caught. The soldiers had come. Through the crack in the rocks, she saw them fan out across the valley, rifles ready. Among them rode a new officer, a man younger than most, his uniform cleaner, his posture rigid. He stopped at the edge of the burnt camp, studying the ground. "No bodies," she heard him say faintly. "They're not gone far," another soldier replied. "Captain, We found footprints heading north. 2 sets. One small, one larger. The officer's jaw tightened. Then we keep moving. The woman pressed a hand over the baby's mouth as he stirred. The soldiers passed dangerously close, their boots crunching over stones, the clatter of their gear echoing through the canyon. She held her breath until the last sound faded into silence. Hours passed. The chief did not return. The woman stepped out of the cave finally, her heart heavy. The sun burned high above, and the world felt painfully empty. Then she heard something, a low groan from behind the rocks. She rushed toward it and found the chief lying on the ground, blood soaking through his side. His bow was gone, his hand clutching a small charm. "They found me," he rasped, "but I led them away." She knelt beside him, tears filling her eyes. "You're hurt." He shook his head weakly. "It's nothing." "Help me up." She tried, but he winced in pain. "We can't stay here," she said. "They'll come back." He smiled faintly. "You've learned to think like one of us." They managed to reach a shaded spot near the stream. The woman tore her shawl to bind his wound, her hands steady now despite the fear. "You saved us again," she whispered. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." His eyes opened slowly. "You don't owe me. You've already given more than anyone else." His voice was faint but steady. "When I saw you hold my son, I thought you were a ghost sent to remind me what mercy looks like." He paused, looking at her face. "But you're real. And mercy hurts because it asks us to remember we're still human." Her throat tightened. "You can't give up," she said. "We'll find help." He smiled weakly. "Help doesn't come to people like me." He tried to sit up, but pain forced him back. "Listen," he said. "If they find us, you say nothing. Not about the camp, not about me. You take the boy and run. Do you understand?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I won't leave you." His hand reached for hers, firm despite his weakness. "You must." As the light began to fade, the air grew colder. The baby stirred again, his small cries echoing through the canyon. The woman held him close, her mind spinning. She thought of the soldiers still out there, of the officer who had vowed to find them, and of the fragile line between compassion and survival. Somewhere deep down, she knew the war between their worlds was far from over. The child sleeping in her arms was proof of that, a bridge no one wanted but fate had forced upon them. That night, she stayed awake beside the wounded chief, watching the shadows shift across the rocks. Every sound made her heart race. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves howled, and the river whispered through the dark. The chief slept fitfully, his breathing shallow. The woman whispered prayers she no longer believed in, to gods she no longer knew. She looked down at the baby's peaceful face and thought of what the future might demand of them all. The storm was not over. It was only gathering strength. Waiting for the moment to strike again, the chief's wound grew worse as they climbed deeper into the mountains. The woman could see it in the way his steps slowed, in the way his breaths came shorter, sharper. Each time she offered to stop, he shook his head. "If we stop, they find us," he said. "Keep moving." The sky above was bruised with storm clouds, and thunder rumbled across the distant hills. The air smelled of coming rain, sharp and cold. The baby whimpered softly in her arms, his small hands clutching at her dress. She whispered to him to stay quiet, though her own voice trembled. By the time they reached the ridge, darkness had fallen. The wind howled through the rocks, scattering sand across the narrow trail. Below them, torches flickered, soldiers, moving like ghosts through the valley. She could hear their shouts faintly, the clang of metal, the bark of orders. The chief leaned against the stone wall, blood running down his arm. His bow hung useless at his side. "They're tracking us," he said. "They'll find the cave before dawn." She looked down the steep slope, her heart pounding. There was nowhere left to run but up. "Can you climb?" she asked. He gave a weak smile. "If I fall, promise me you'll keep going." She shook her head fiercely. "I'm not leaving you again." His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "Then we'll both die here." They began the climb. The rocks were slick with rain, the wind cutting like knives. She went first, holding the baby against her chest, one hand gripping the stone. The chief followed close behind, his breath ragged. Lightning split the sky, revealing the valley below, a line of torches snaking upward, getting closer. "They're coming," she gasped. The chief didn't answer. He slipped once, catching himself on a ledge, pain flashing across his face. She reached for him, their fingers brushing. "Hold on," she whispered. "Please." He gritted his teeth and climbed higher. The storm roaring around them, they reached a narrow plateau near the top, sheltered by a cluster of pines. The woman collapsed to her knees, clutching the baby tightly. The child began to cry, the sound small but piercing. The chief crouched beside her, wincing as he pressed a hand to his wound. "He'll give us away," he said softly. She rocked the child, desperate. "He's hungry," she said. "He's scared." The chief looked toward the valley, where the soldiers' lights glimmered closer. "Fear keeps us alive," he murmured, "but sometimes it kills too." His words made her heart ache. She pressed her forehead to the baby's, whispering, "Please, little one. Just a little longer." The storm broke then. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, washing the blood from the chief's hands and soaking through her dress. The thunder drowned out every sound but their breathing. For a while, it felt like the world itself was trying to hide them. The chief used the moment to build a small barrier of branches near the edge, disguising their trail. His strength was fading fast, but he kept working until his hands shook. When he finally sat beside her, his face was pale and his eyes distant. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "I used to think thunder was the voice of the Great Spirit. My father told me it meant the heavens were listening. Tonight, I hope he's wrong." She looked at him, rain streaming down her cheeks. "You think we'll die here?" He was silent for a long moment. "I think death follows us both," he said finally. "You from your world, me from mine. But maybe this child was meant to live between them." His words lingered in the cold air, heavy and strange. She wanted to believe him, but fear pressed too tightly around her heart. Somewhere below, a gunshot cracked through the rain. Then another. The soldiers had found the trail. The chief stood, drawing his knife. "Stay hidden," he said. "If they come, don't move." She caught his arm. "You can't fight them all." He looked down at her, his expression calm but resolute. "I can slow them." His hand brushed her cheek, briefly rough, warm, fleeting. "Take care of him." Before she could answer, he was gone, moving silently into the storm. She waited in the dark, every second stretching into eternity. The baby whimpered softly, and she pressed him against her chest, trying to still his cries. Below, she could hear faint shouting, the clash of boots against stone. Then came the gunfire. Flashes of light tore through the rain, each one sending a jolt of terror through her. She could make out voices, angry, confused, and then a scream that echoed through the mountains before being swallowed by thunder. Her whole body trembled. "Please, no," she whispered, clutching the child tighter. "Don't let it be him." The storm began to fade just before dawn. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the wind softening into a whisper. The woman waited until the light crept across the horizon before moving. She stood on shaking legs, the baby heavy in her arms, and stepped out from the trees. The world below was littered with broken branches and mud, the remnants of a night that had changed everything. She began to descend carefully, searching the rocks for any sign of him. Her heart pounded as she called out softly, "Where are you?" Only the echo answered. Then, near a fallen tree, she saw a movement. The chief lay on the ground, half covered in mud and rainwater. His chest rose faintly with each shallow breath. She rushed to him, kneeling beside his body. "You're alive," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain. He opened his eyes weakly. "They're gone," he said. "I led them away. Most turned back." His hand gripped hers tightly. "But others will come. You can't stay here." She shook her head. "I won't leave you again." He tried to speak, but his strength failed him. His eyes drifted toward the child, who had begun to cry softly. "He needs you," he said faintly. "Both of you must live." Before she could answer, a distant sound froze her blood, a horse's neigh. The creak of leather and the sharp clatter of metal. The soldiers hadn't retreated completely. A small patrol was returning, drawn by the echoes of the fight. The chief's eyes widened slightly. "Hide," he whispered. "Go now." She hesitated, torn between running and staying. "They'll kill you," she said. He managed a faint smile. "Then I'll die a warrior." She gathered the baby and slipped behind the rocks, crouching low as the patrol approached. There were 3 soldiers, their rifles glinting in the morning light. They dismounted near the clearing, scanning the ground. One of them, the young captain she had seen before, knelt beside the wounded chief. "He's still breathing," the captain said. Another soldier stepped forward, raising his weapon. "Orders were clear," he said coldly. "No prisoners." The woman's heart stopped. She gripped the child, tears streaming silently down her face. She wanted to scream to stop them, but fear kept her frozen. The chief looked up weakly at the captain. "You kill me," he said in a strained voice, "and another will rise. You burn our land, and the wind will still carry our names." The captain hesitated, his expression flickering with something like doubt. But the soldier beside him raised his gun again. "Enough talk," he muttered. "End it." The woman couldn't bear it. She stepped out from behind the rocks before her mind could stop her. "No," she cried. The soldiers turned instantly, guns snapping toward her. The baby began to cry loudly, the sound echoing through the trees. The captain's eyes widened. "You," he said, recognizing her. "You're alive?" She stood trembling, clutching the child. "He saved us," she said. "He could have killed me, but he didn't. Please don't do this." The captain hesitated, torn between orders and humanity. The other soldier scowled. "She's lying," he said. "He's the one they've been hunting." "The one who burned the supply train?" The woman shook her head desperately. "You don't understand. He's just a father trying to protect his son." The captain's gaze moved from her to the baby, then to the dying warrior on the ground. His jaw tightened. "A father," he repeated quietly. The standoff held in silence, broken only by the sound of wind and the distant roll of thunder. The chief struggled to sit up, his breath shallow. "If you kill me," he said slowly, "then kill her too. Because we share the same fate now." His words hit like lightning. The captain looked at him for a long time, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he lowered his weapon slightly. "We're taking them all," he said finally. "Alive." The other soldiers started to protest, but the captain's tone left no room for argument. "That's an order." The woman's relief was brief. She knew captivity under soldiers could mean anything: punishment, interrogation, or worse. Yet as the captain bound their hands loosely and motioned for the others to move, she glanced back at the chief. He met her eyes with silent resolve. They both knew the fight was not over. The road ahead would decide everything: the fate of the child, the truth between their worlds, and the fragile thread of mercy that still held them together. The rain began again as they were led down the mountain, washing away the blood, but not the fear. Somewhere deep in her chest, the woman felt the storm gathering once more, heavier and closer than ever before. The rain had stopped by the time they reached the valley. The sun broke through the clouds in pale streaks, washing the land in gold, but the beauty of it only made the silence heavier. The soldiers led them across the open ground, past the burned remains of the Apache camp, where smoke still rose from the ashes. The woman kept her head low, clutching the baby close, afraid to look too long at what was left behind. The chief walked beside her, his hands bound but his back straight. Even wounded and weak, there was still something unbroken in his walk. The young captain rode ahead, quiet and distant, his jaw set hard, as if he was trying to convince himself that what he was doing was right. They stopped near the river, where a temporary camp had been built. The soldiers dismounted and began unloading supplies. The captain motioned for them to sit near a wagon. "You'll be fed," he said simply. "After that, I'll decide where you're to go." His words carried no cruelty, but no comfort either. The woman didn't answer. She sat in the mud, rocking the child, her eyes hollow from exhaustion. The baby stirred and reached for her necklace, unaware of the fear surrounding them. The chief watched them silently, a faint smile touching his lips. "He doesn't know hate yet," he said softly. "Maybe that's what will save him." She glanced at him, her eyes filling. "If the world lets him live long enough," she murmured. By nightfall, the soldiers had settled. Fires burned low, their smoke rising into a calm sky. The woman and the chief were given a small corner of the camp, guarded but not tied. The captain approached once more, a lantern in his hand. "We'll reach Fort Bowie tomorrow," he said. "There's a doctor there. He can tend your wound." The chief's expression didn't change. "And after that?" The captain hesitated. "After that, I'll report you to my superiors. They'll decide." The woman rose quickly. "He's no threat to anyone now," she said. "He saved my life. He saved his son's life. You saw it yourself." The captain looked at her for a long moment. "You think the army cares about mercy?" he said quietly. "They only see what fits their reports." He turned away, the lantern light flickering across his face. "But I'll do what I can." Later that night, as the camp grew quiet, the woman couldn't sleep. She listened to the wind brushing through the trees, the soft murmur of the river, and the restless shifting of horses. The chief sat nearby, staring into the dying fire. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes were sharp and alive. "You should rest," she said softly. He shook his head. "I've rested enough in my life. What matters now is the child." She looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What will happen to him?" she asked. "If we reach the fort?" The chief's gaze drifted toward the darkness beyond the firelight. "If they take him from you, they'll raise him as one of theirs. He'll forget our songs, our tongue. He'll grow to believe we were the enemy." His voice cracked slightly. "But if you run, you can give him both worlds. You can teach him to remember." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "You're the only one who can." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she couldn't do it alone. She didn't even know where to go, but something in his face stopped her. He wasn't asking. He was giving her the last piece of his will. "The soldiers will guard us," she said faintly. "There's no way out." The chief's hand moved toward the firelight. From beneath his belt he pulled a small obsidian blade, its edge dark and glinting. "There's always a way," he said. "When the sun rises, they'll move toward the fort. Before then, take the horse by the river. It's unguarded. Follow the canyon north. The land will hide you." She shook her head, trembling. "They'll kill you." His lips curved faintly. "They'll kill me anyway. But if my son lives, then I win." The hours passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. When the first pale light touched the sky, the chief stood. His strength seemed to come back all at once, his voice steady, his movements deliberate. "Go," he said softly. Now, the woman hesitated only a moment before rising. She wrapped the child tightly and moved quietly toward the river. The camp was still half asleep, the guards drowsy from the long night. Every sound felt louder than it should, every step a risk. She reached the water's edge, where the horse stood tethered, its reins wet from the mist. Behind her, she heard the faint murmur of voices, then a shout. The camp was stirring. The chief stepped into the open, shouting something in Apache that echoed through the valley. The soldiers woke instantly, grabbing their rifles. He stood tall in the firelight, unarmed now, his voice rising above the confusion. The woman froze, realizing what he was doing. He was drawing them away. Gunfire broke through the air, sharp and final. The horses reared, the soldiers scattered, and in the chaos, she climbed onto the horse and fled. The baby cried out, the wind cutting through her hair as she rode into the canyon. Behind her, she heard one last shot, louder than the rest, then silence. The ride north was endless. The trail wound through stone and shadow, through rivers that cut the earth like veins. Days turned to weeks. She lived off roots, berries, and whatever small mercy the land offered. The baby grew stronger, his eyes bright like the desert sky, his laughter breaking through the loneliness. At night she would whisper stories to him, the kind the chief had told her about the stars and the spirits. It's about honor and love and loss. "Your father was a warrior," she'd say softly. "He fought so you could live free." As the child would reach for her hair, smiling, too young to understand, but she kept speaking anyway. as if her words could carry his father's spirit forward. When spring came, she found a small settlement near the edge of the mountains. The people there were kind but cautious. They didn't ask where she came from, and she didn't offer. She worked as a seamstress, traded herbs, and kept mostly to herself. The boy grew quickly, strong and curious, with his father's dark eyes and her gentle hands. Sometimes he would ask about the feather she kept tucked in a box, worn and old. She'd smile and say, "That's from a brave man who loved you before you were born." He would nod, satisfied, not yet ready to understand. Years passed, quietly. The world beyond the mountains changed, new towns rose, soldiers moved on, and the old wars faded into memory. But at night, when the wind blew through the pines, she still heard echoes of drums, the songs of a people who had refused to vanish. The boy grew into a young man, tall and proud. He could ride like the wind, speak both tongues, and carried a strength that belonged to both bloodlines. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he asked softly, "Mother, who was my father?" She looked at him for a long time, her eyes glistening with memories she had buried deep. "He was a man who taught me that love can survive even where hatred was born," she said quietly. "And he believed that peace begins when one life is spared instead of taken." The fire crackled, the light flickering across his face. He nodded slowly, understanding something she could never fully explain. "Then I'll honor him," he said. "Not with revenge, but by remembering." Her heart swelled with both pride and pain. "That's all he ever wanted," she whispered. When she was older and her hair had turned silver, she often walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. From there, she could see the endless stretch of desert and the faint line of the river where everything had begun. She would stand there in the wind, holding the feather in her hand, feeling the presence of the man who had given everything so that their child might live. She'd close her eyes and whisper a prayer not for herself, but for the two worlds that had once collided and, through a child's innocent cry, had found a fragile bridge between them. The sun would set slowly over the red cliffs, painting the land in hues of fire and gold. Somewhere far below, the river would keep flowing, carrying with it the echoes of love, loss, and the kind of peace born from sacrifice. And as night fell, the woman would smile through her tears, knowing that even in a world divided by fear, a single act of compassion had changed everything. The story of the Apache's son, the child who once wouldn't stop crying, had become more than survival. It had become a promise that no hatred lasts forever, and that even the harshest desert can bloom when touched by mercy.